Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone to this webinar on JSON report. This webinar is organized by Asian American Scholar Forum. Its mission is promote academic belonging, openness, freedom, and equality for all. And it's guided by the following values: the embracing, belonging, inclusivity, diversity, and equality, promoting academic freedom, open science, and a healthy intellectual environment, advocating justice and fairness, empowering truth-seeking, communication, and mutual understanding, and also advance public good and humanity. So today, we are very honored to have Peter Fisher to discuss with us on JSON report. Professor Fisher is a Thomas Frank Professor of Physics, is a head of physics department at MIT. That is, he's a head of my department. His research interests are precision test of electrodynamics and detection of dark matter and development of a new kind of a particle detector. Professor Fisher is also founder of Vitricity, a startup company for wireless energy transmission for commercial use. In the past, Professor Fisher led a DARPA study of a wireless energy transmission between spacecraft as a part of a F4 program. He recently served on the particle physics program prioritization panel that defined a roadmap for experimental particle physics over the next 10 years, encompassing about $8 billion in research fund from DOE and NSF. In 2019, Professor Fisher led a group to produce a JSON report for NSF. Today's moderator is Professor Xiaodong Zhang, and he's a Critchfield professor in engineering at Ohio State University. His research interests focus on data management in computer and distributed systems. Several of his research results has been widely adopted in major computing and data processing systems by commercial company and some open source communities. He's recipient of a 2020 ACM Microarchitecture Test of Time Award. He received the Joe and Ruth Sparrow Award for excellency in education leadership to recognize his accomplishment as a department chair for computer science and engineering at Ohio State. He's a fellow of ACM and a fellow of IEEE. So Xiaodong, now you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Xiaodong, for the nice introduction. Xiaodong didn't introduce himself, so let me just say a very simple introduction to Xiaodong. Xiaodong Wen is a professor of physics at MIT, and just like Professor Fisher, he's another world-class physicist. Before starting the program, I would like to introduce two special guests who are legal experts and have given webinar lectures for us. The first one is Jay Brett, who is the chief of the Counterintelligence and Export Control sections of the National Security Division in the Department of Justice. He previously served as the deputy chief of the National Security Section in the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. Before that, Mr. Brett has many years of experience as a line prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia and within the Department of Justice. Mr. Brett is a graduate of Harvard Law School and Brandeis University. Welcome you, Jay. The second one is Maggie Lewis, who is a professor of law at Seton Hall University. She is currently visiting at Academia Sinica in Taiwan, and he's now in the morning time. Maggie is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a public intellectual program fellow with the National Committee on United States-China Relations, and a former Fulbright senior scholar at the National Taiwan University. Welcome you, Maggie. I would also like to say a few words on why we organized this webinar by the Asian American Scholar Forum. I want to start simple by mentioning several necessities in our daily life. We use electricity all the time. We turn on the lights in the evening. We use air conditioners in rooms. We have refrigerators at home. We drive car to work. We take airline to travel. We use computers with the internet. And each of us, or billions of people, have cell phones in the pockets. And I can give you many other examples. The human lives have been continuously improved, and the society advanced with these necessities. The United States is the birthplace of many innovations, including all the above mentioned. The best fundamental research has also been done in this country to provide scientific basis for all the innovations. So this is the land of opportunities and the land of innovations. The American world leadership in science, research, scientific research, and technology innovation has been supported by 3 pillars. 1, open intellectual exchange. 2, global collaborations. And 3, knowledge sharing. In addition, immigrant talents have made great contributions to the United States research enterprise. So in summary, the openness is critical for the best research environment. As we have observed, recently, the voices expressing concerns of risks to the openness is quite high. The theme of this webinar will be focused on the value and the risks of the openness. So I'm delighted to give the floor to our distinguished speaker, Professor Peter Fisher. So let's welcome Professor Fisher.
Okay, thank you. So Professor Zhang, should I just go ahead? And
no, go ahead, please.
Okay, and then if there are questions in the chat, if they're appropriate, could you just let me know and I'll answer them as we go along, and then there'll be time at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I really just want to echo the sentiments that have been expressed. You know, as a department head, I'm involved in hiring and promotions and recruiting graduate students, and it is just a cornerstone of everything we do that we don't concern ourselves very much with where people come from. We really want the very best people, as we all do at our universities, and it really sickens me to see one particular group singled out for you know, bad treatment. And one of the reasons I got involved in writing this report was to help mitigate that as much as possible, both to keep our universities strong, and also just because it's not at all consistent with the way I feel people should be treated. So what I'll do is I just want to have a little introduction where I talk about our organization and our charge for the National Science Foundation that led to this report. And then I'm going to just go through the executive summary of the report, which contains the findings and recommendations, and explain some of the background thinking in the report to each one of those. And then there'll be some time for questions. I also got a series of questions from the organizers, and I will try to answer those as we go along, but Professor Zhang, if you want to bring one of them up, if you want to bring them up as you see fit, I'm happy to answer them. And I want to say, groups like this are really essential because you are all respected academics at your universities. You have voices, and I think a really important part of this is to get everyone, both Asian and non-Asian in our universities on the same page and understanding what the situation is and what we can do as academics to mitigate it as much as possible. So let me just start by introducing our organization. It's a rather odd thing. In the Second World War, many academics played important roles in developing science and technology that was important for winning the war. And then afterwards, this group, and you know their names, went back to their universities and resumed life as professors, but also maintained close connection with the federal government. And these were people like Oppenheimer and Fermi and Lawrence and Kistiakowsky and Neddemeyer. And in the late 50s, they became concerned that as they were coming close to retiring, there wasn't a similar group of younger faculty engaging with the government. And so they actually formed this group, which was originally called Project Sunshine. And it was a group of academics that would gather during the summer and study and write reports on important problems for the US government. So our group, which is called JASON, formed in 1960. So we've been around for about 61 years. And at a certain point, Mildred Goldberger, Murph Goldberger's wife, thought Project Sunshine was a terrible name and suggested the name Jason in honor of Jason and the Argonauts, who was a Greek hero. And so that name stuck. We always write it in all capital letters, but it doesn't stand for anything. Although some people it stands for Junior Achiever, somewhat older now. So we get assigned problems from many parts of the government, and we work in groups to understand them. We get briefings, and then we write a report. And the thing that we bring that's different is that we all have security clearances, and can have access to anything we need, including the classified briefings and including being able to talk to people in a secure environment. So we have special meeting rooms that called SCIFs, where we can talk to each other about highly classified things. And so the NSF came to us with this problem for the specific reason that they always run into the problem, and I'm sure many of you have, and I think Jay Brad has probably lived this, that the various parts of the intelligence community and FBI and Department of Justice would have concerns about, foreign entanglements, let's say, and had a difficult time convincing academics that there was a real problem, because there's some natural suspicion, but also there's kind of this classification barrier. So the idea was that we would have access to all the classified and unclassified information, and then be able to write about it in a way that was accessible to academics. And in fact, we have some important recommendations about this. So I'm going to, let me see. I'm going to share a screen. This is, let's see, can you all see the executive summary? Xiaodong, you see it? Exactly.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from our report. Our report's on the web. I'll put a link in the chat in a minute. But this is from our report, and it contains, you know, a distillation of everything that's in the report. And so the NSF came to us, and by NSF I mean we worked closely with the director at the time, Franz Cordova, and Jim Olvested and Rebecca Kaiser, who are the next level down. So this was this report was of great interest to the very top levels of the NSF and the National Science Board. And in fact, we interacted with both the director and National Science Board throughout the production of the report. And the normal cadence of our report is we gather in June. We'll hear a week of briefings from all over the place. We'll work on, do reading, meet among ourselves for about 8 weeks. And then our output is a written report due October 1st, and then briefings. The NSF charged us to write a report that can be widely disseminated and discussed in the academic community. This was unusual for Jason because usually we study, you know, strange Russian torpedoes or quantum radar or, you know, some complicated thing, and we write a highly classified report that gets read by 2 people and then shredded. The NSF told us from the beginning they wanted everything possible in the report to be unclassified and written with the idea that it be widely disseminated and discussed in the academic community. And then there is a classified appendix that's got some other material in it, but nothing that's particularly significant to this group, certainly. And NSF was doing this because I think all of us know there is an increasing bipartisan, one of the few bipartisan things around, concern in Congress that the US research infrastructure is in jeopardy by various people, and I don't want to single out China, various people who will steal intellectual property, report on activities in an unorthodox way, and engage in undisclosed activities. And the NSF wanted us to recommend policies that they could implement that would mitigate the concerns in Congress, because Congress is considering various pieces of legislation that would restrict access of foreign nationals to US graduate programs, to federal fundings, introduce classification more widely in scientific research, and a whole lot of things that I think all of us would feel would greatly diminish the US research enterprise. So what I'm showing now is the questions we were asked, and they were fairly broad. And one thing I should say was that the NSF sponsors were just fantastic. They were very responsive to our questions. They connected us with a lot of people. And we view the NSF as kind of the gold standard of scientific funding agencies inside the federal government. Lots of parts of the government fund science: NSF, DOD, DOE, NIH. But the NSF is the ones that I think most universities really look to for the moral and ethical leadership, and the other funding agencies tend to follow the NSF. So these are the questions, and these are literally the only guidance we got. I should say the report was written by a group of about 10 of us, and the primary authors were myself, Tim Stearns, who's a biologist at Stanford, and Sally Keller, who's a data scientist at University of Virginia, and they were both fabulous to work with. So the questions are, just up front, what is the value and what are the risks of openness generally associated with fundamental research? I think that's a pretty broad and pretty clear question, and we spent a lot of time answering that. How should the principles of scientific openness be affirmed and modified? We talked quite a bit about this, and there are aspects to openness that we do need to be careful about, and I'll come back to that later. Are there areas of fundamental research that should be more controlled rather than openly available? What are those areas? This relates specifically to a designation, which is not classification, but it's called Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI, or referred to as CUI. And there has been discussion of certain sensitive areas getting CUI classification. For example, any research with the word quantum in it. As you may know, the many parts of the government are very, very concerned about quantum cryptography, quantum measurement, and particularly quantum computation. 4 is closely related. What controls, if any, could be placed on particular types of information? How can this be managed that maintains maximum benefit over research environment? I've highlighted number 5. What good practices could be put in place by academic researchers to balance the open environment of fundamental research with the needs for national and economic security? Probably our main recommendation findings and recommendations have to do with exactly this question. And there are things that all of us can do and should have been doing for a long time to answer number 5. And then really, what should the funding agencies and NSF do to uphold open environment of fundamental research with the needs for national security? Okay, so we had meetings with lots and lots of people. We had classified and unclassified reports from the intelligence community, the agency, the FBI, people at the NIH. And then, since we're all academics, we talked to our own vice presidents for research and colleagues. So we spend a lot of time gathering information, and then we kind of distilled things into 4 main themes. What really struck me, even though I've been at MIT for 35 years, I've been in collaborations that had large numbers of people who were in foreign countries, including China, including Taiwan. The importance for scientific talent in the US just, it is unquestionable. And I think one thing all of us can do is really talk about that when it comes up in a very, very tangible way. The fact that the best people in the world really compete to come to MIT and other great universities and study, is critical, and many of them stay. But even if they didn't stay and return to their home countries, it's still a boon for us, because we really do need high quality people, and there are not enough US citizens to do everything we need to do. So there are really opportunities. Second, and not surprising, placing restrictions on access to data in fundamental research would just compromise everything we do in a terrible way, and we wrote about that. The third is really important. I should have highlighted it. We need to extend our notion of research integrity to include disclosures of commitment and potential conflicts of interests. And really, the main recommendations of our report that are actionable by us and our universities is really bolstering the disclosure and disclosure at all levels. Now, all of us on this phone call, or at least many of us, are principal investigators and or professors, and we're used to disclosing all kinds of things. But we saw the need for disclosures really at all levels. So somebody coming from a foreign country to study in the U.S., should disclose all their institutional affiliations, for example. And if they're bringing their own funding, we need to know where that funding comes from and what obligations that funding carries. And then the fourth thing, and this is really important, and I'd be very interested to hear what our two guests have to say, Jay Brad and Maggie Lewis. What we really found was that there was not a common understanding between government agencies and academia on how to talk about fundamental research at universities. It's on both sides. It's not having a common language and not having much contact. And I think a thing that's really important is to get the security part of the government and the academic part of the government able to communicate to each other so that good decisions can be made on both sides. And that starts with really making the argument that having foreign scholars come to the United States is just critical to the health of our research enterprise. So let me stop there. Let's see, I guess if there are any questions at this point, I'd be happy to ask them.
So I think there's one quick question, Peter. One is, you mentioned about a quantum, and someone raised a question about how about a quantum theory? Is this also in the scope of some kind of a classified restriction?
Yeah, well, yes, it certainly is. I mean, this is, we briefed congressional staffers on this, and professional staffers are pretty smart. They generally are very well trained academically, and the ones that have been there for a while have a lot of experience. When they hear the term quantum, they kind of don't really know who to ask about. Okay, what should be on this list? What are the areas? What about quantum theory is important from a national security point of view? And all of us, at least those of us in physics, know that you can't answer that question because this is fundamental knowledge, and the notion of quantum entanglement, which Xiaodong Wen is one of the world's experts on. I mean, it's just universal. It's just the way the universe works. And so if you put on a list that anything having to do with quantum mechanical entanglement is going to carry restrictions and certain people can't look at it, it's just an incredible disservice. So we really have to establish a dialogue with congressional staff and people in the intelligence community and FBI, so that they understand really what the difference between fundamental research that takes place at universities and applied research that takes place in national labs and S&T divisions in the government, and that one is something that you should not restrict because it's fundamental knowledge that benefits everyone, and then the other, the appropriate thing to do is go through the classification process and identify those things that do present a national security risk. And the government's good at this. I mean, they well, maybe that's an overstatement, but they know how to do it, and they've been doing it for a long time with other kinds of information, and they just need to learn how to do it, and we need to help them when it's appropriate for things related to quantum mechanics and quantum theory. And I'll come back to the distinction between fundamental and applied research and classification later on. Does that answer the question?
I think so, more than.
Okay.
There's another question. I think it's more or less legal related. And the question to you, how representative are these problematic 1,000 talents program contacts the government has shown among all the TTP? I guess TTP means trusted traveler program contacts. Are they just a few or are a large percentage of TTP contacts? So that's the question. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I think TTP refers to 1,000 talents programs.
Okay. I thought.
So we have the DOE Early Career Award. We have the NSF Career Award, and there are all kinds of foundation fellowships for early career faculty, for example. My understanding is most 1,000 talents programs are similar to those. They are programs designed by particular universities or particular entities to attract talented people to whatever country is supporting them. There are a few, and we were briefed on them, that have onerous, undisclosed restrictions. And we feel that the appropriate approach to that is to educate faculty in the United States on how to, what do you ask yourself to make sure that you're engaging in something that is appropriate for your position and legal in the United States that won't get you in trouble. So I think from what we can see, most of the so-called 1,000 talents programs are just fine. There are a few that aren't. Is the number increasing or decreasing? Don't really know. But main message is that I think when approached about or applying for a 1,000 talents program, there's some due diligence that we should all do automatically. Okay, there's a question about having a clean laptop. I'm happy to talk about this. It's a little bit outside of our report, but if we could save that to the end.
Okay. Peter, please go ahead. I think.
Yeah. So I do want to have time, so I'm not gonna just grind through all of the findings. I'm going to I'll just talk about some of the highlights, which is 3. I mean, we did find, and there is good evidence from the intelligence community that the government of China and some of its affiliated institutions do engage in ethics that are of concern. And the nature of intelligence is to not give you statistics, but to tell you as early as possible, this could be happening. Watch out. And we certainly saw evidence that's going on. Is it a lot? Don't think so. Is it characteristic of all programs? Don't think so. But really, if you're engaging in China, you have to be careful and you have to ask the right questions and you have to think before you get involved in something, and some people don't. And that's really finding 4, which is quite closely related to finding 3, is the scale and the scope of the program, the problem remain poorly defined. We do think the response of introducing restrictions is more than warranted by what we know or what we heard. We all worry about conflicts of interest, and this is finding 5. Another thing that we come back to in the recommendations is conflict of commitment. And this is really just kind of basic employment. If your university pays you a 9-month salary and you have a grant that pays you 2 months of summer salary, and you go to a foreign country and you're part of a recruitment program or 1,000 Talents program that pays you 1 month summer salary, and you report that, that should be reported, and that adds up to 100% of your time. What we as PIs should not be doing is accruing 150% of our time or 120% of our time. So one of our recommendations is going to be that our universities ask us to report and monitor our commitments, and we should honestly report what our commitments are, both inside and outside the US, and that's to our universities. And then anytime we submit a federal grant, we should list current and pending support. And our universities and the NSF really need to help us understand exactly that current and pending support includes funds that you may control because of a collaboration outside the country. And the universities need to provide experts to help faculty who are doing those things and manage them responsibly. I have many faculty who control funds in many countries, and we work with them to make sure that that's appropriately communicated. And that's also related to item 6, that the universities and research funding agencies need to have policies and need to provide support. Number 7 comes back to this issue of classification. There's the National Security Decision Directive 189 that was established in 1985 that makes a clear distinction between fundamental research and research that could be classified. Fundamental research, according to NSDD 189, is research that is from the beginning intended for publication. It is not intended to develop a product or capability. It is really intended to be freely disseminated and should not be classified. Other research, which is to produce a specific product or develop specific information to produce a capability, may be classified, and the government has robust systems of classification review. And so this was 1985. This was, Reagan administration during the Cold War, and this has been reaffirmed in both Republican and Democratic administrations, and it continues to inform policies today. And then finding number 8 has to do with this controlled unclassified information. So I think many of us know about HIPAA, which controls access to medical information. FERPA is all about rights and access to student records. There's export control and ITAR, which are related to things that could be used for military purposes. And then Title 13, which protects, for example, census data. All of these are examples of controlled unclassified information. There are many others. The notion that you would protect anything that's considered fundamental research under NSDD 189 with this CUI designation is very problematic and would really compromise our ability to carry out research. So those are the findings. I didn't go through all of them, and we wrote a lot about all of these things in the report. I'm happy if there are any questions on these. Should I go ahead? Oh, I see there's some in the chat, okay. Let's see, there was a question about what areas of science our team was. I'm a physicist. Tim Stearns is a biologist. Sally Keller is a data scientist. We have biologists, physicists, we have an economist, and everybody contributed. And then how about social and behavioral science? How about research that compares much? Yeah, so there's a question about social and behavioral science. I mean, again, you know, at various times the government has funded quite a bit of social and behavioral science, and we view that along with the physical and life sciences. Is there a more concrete example of controlled classified information in the past that illustrates the purpose, operation, and benefit of this concept? Yeah, well, so ITAR, which relates to the international trade of arms, was you know, an example of controlled unclassified information. So it is just controlling the export of, you know, in many cases, physical pieces of hardware that could be reverse engineered. And so that's one example of controlled unclassified information. Any of you who do clinical life sciences, HIPAA, I've forgotten what HIPAA stands for, but it is, you know, related to medical privacy. And that is to prevent people's medical records from being widely disseminated and possibly used for purposes otherwise than they were intended. Another interesting example of controlled unclassified information is Title 13. So Title 13 restricts census data, and the US Census, and one was just carried out last year, is mandated by the Constitution. It's carried out every 10 years, and it's aggregated down into census tracts, which some census tracts, and this rolls up to census districts and then cities and states, and then the population of your states determines how many representatives you get. The census tracts actually may only have a few people in them. And so from census data, you could actually re-identify people in specific census tracts. So Title 13 restricts access to census data to prevent that. So it's some of it's related to data privacy. I'm not an expert in controlled unclassified information, but you know, there are something like 120 different designations. And it has been proposed and actively discussed that, for example, data from federally funded research projects should be characterized as controlled unclassified information, and that would require additional computer security for computers that hold that kind of data, how they connect to the network and who has access to them. And that would be very problematic. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, so Maggie Lewis mentions the Endless Frontier Act. I've been trying to keep up on it, but as she points out, it's 2,000 pages long, and apparently there are all kinds of little surprises buried into it. And I'd love to hear what they are, because I just haven't had time. Okay, I will just go through our recommendations. And again, I won't go through all of them. Number one, and I said this before, the umbrella of research integrity should be expanded to include full disclosure of commitments and actual and potential conflicts of information. And we felt that should apply to everybody in the research enterprise. And then recommendation number two is that the NSF should undertake the actual construction of guidelines and investigative procedures, as they already do for research integrity. And if any of you who've been involved in research integrity violations at your university know that this is a big deal. And then recommendation 3 is really that NSF should take the lead, not just with universities, but with professional societies, publishers, funding agencies. If you look at our report, we have a big chart of all the different stakeholders. And we did include professional societies such as this one. And professional societies are really great places for getting the word out on what people need to do to protect themselves. So recommendation 4, the NSF should adopt, promulgate to all stakeholders project assessment tools that facilitate an evaluation of risks to research integrity and for research collaborations and for all non-federal grants and research agreements. So this is actually, I think, one of the most important recommendation. And let's see, I'm going to try to make this big enough. Sorry. Okay, so this is what MIT Vice President for Research actually has on their website. And this is something all of us should ask ourselves anytime that we're getting involved in an external engagement, really with anyone. This is not just directed at any particular country. But we should just ask ourselves, is there a risk to national security? Are there civil or human rights risks? Is there a risk to US national competitiveness? Will expert compliance be assured? What are the intellectual property risks? Are there clear data and publication policies? Is there an early termination risk? Is there a misrepresentation risk? What are the risks to the institution's core community and core values, and what's the risk of not engaging? To this, I would add, is there a clear code of conduct for the collaboration? What applicable laws apply? These are questions that, as academics going out into the world and collaborating and really making use of the openness of to do really good science, we do have to ask ourselves, these questions. Not that there are people who are going to take advantage of us. There may be some, but really just when you engage in a different culture, and you all know this, when you engage in a different culture, you have different sets of values, there are different norms, and you should make it your business to make sure you understand those norms and how they pertain to what it is you want to do. So this is just kind of an example of recommendation 4, which is the project assessment tools. Recommendation 5 is happening anyway. I think certainly MIT and many other universities are paying a lot more attention to ethics. And in fact, at MIT, we have the Schwarzman College of Computing, and about a quarter of the activity in the Schwarzman College is an ethical component relating to the use of artificial intelligence and other advanced software. Recommendation 6 says NSDD 189 is great, and CUI don't. And that's really all we had to say about it. Recommendation 7 is really, as universities, we need to build better bridges with the intelligence agencies and law enforcement so that we can talk to us and they can talk to them. And certainly from most academic points of view, the FBI briefings we get, if anyone ever goes to them, seem very, very heavy-handed and very foreign. And I think many of the things they are trying to tell us are valuable and are important, but they need to be communicated in a way that really emphasizes understanding rather than insistence. And then the last two, well, the last one is, U.S. government and science agencies should develop and implement a strategic plan for maintaining our competitiveness for the top science and engineering talent globally. Yeah, that would be great. And then number 7, one of the reasons I'm here is that we should really engage with our foreign researchers and make this a global effort so that we can establish global norms for openness and transparency in fundamental research. And this is something we can really do for each other as scientists. Okay, so that was pretty quick, but I hope we can have a good discussion. And let's see, I think I'll stop sharing screen. So that's what's in the report. And let's see. Are there any questions?
Okay, so let's first thank Professor Fisher's insightful thinking and wonderful presentation. It is the question and answer session, and please raise your hand because I have too many people. I have to coordinate and synchronize. If you have any questions, raise your hand, and after I call your name, you may unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question. You may also type your questions in the chat board, so I will read it for you.
I mean, while people are thinking of questions, just the question of the burner laptop came up. So, the idea is that you shouldn't carry your laptop with, all kinds of sensitive information outside of the country because it can be very quickly get compromised. And so that you should always have a laptop that's just blank and you connect over the internet, you do everything remotely, using web forms. Yeah, that's really hard to do. I've tried to do it. I think there's something in between having a burner laptop and having what many of my colleagues have, which is a laptop that you open, it connects to the nearest internet and dumps your password into your virtual private network and gives whoever has that laptop unfettered access to the internet at your home university through a VPN. That's really bad, and people, including me, have operated like that for many years. So I think there's something in between. Anyway, that's just what I have to say about burner laptops.
Okay, so Maggie, you may talk now.
Thanks. Well, first, thanks so much to Professor Fisher. This is so interesting. My science experience stopped, I think, with astronomy as an undergrad in Columbia. So this is the most in recent months that I've thought about science in a long time as a lawyer. But what's been increasingly clear to me looking at the China initiative and issues of research security is that there's several different buckets of people who need to be involved. So you have the national security people at the FBI, DOJ, NSC, the science community and OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology, policy and the science advisor. But then you also have the China studies people, which is really more my people who generally do not take their personal laptops with them to China, because understanding within China, what are the entities that really are of concern. It's not just because an entity is based in the PRC, it is ergo a national security concern. And finally, also the people who really understand civil liberties and are trying to think about how to use the criminal law and other laws in ways that are not just constitutional, but also adhering to hopefully much better practices of non-discrimination. So my question is, you get too many cooks in the kitchen, but in some ways, all of these cooks seem necessary. So I'm wondering, especially now we've got Eric Lander, the new science advisor, who has made a point of saying, the rules are unclear. We do need to do a better job. We've got the Domestic Policy Council and Ambassador Rice, who are thinking about issues of how foreign policy are reverberating with AAPI communities. I mean, having worked at JSON and trying to do things across agencies, do you have any advice about how the Biden administration could go forward and bring these different voices together in something that is, if not harmonious, at least not a cacophony, and might lead to some real movement towards a more coherent and thoughtful way of promoting innovation? So thank you.
Yeah, that's a tall order. I mean, I think the NSF is the right group to kind of be the repository of, you know, certainly for the academic side, the repository of policy and processes. They are greatly respected. They're very thoughtful. They have the National Science Board, which gives them great guidance. You know, in JSON, we work between agencies all the time, and just structurally, agencies frequently have a really difficult time even talking to each other for structural reasons. You know, for example, we have really two different classification systems in the country, and just talking across that barrier is really hard. But I think what we came away with is that really the best advice we can give is that solving, you know, protecting our research integrity in the United States should be a grassroots things that is really led by PIs, because and that doesn't mean PIs do everything, but it's to me, the challenge is really getting everyone in my department to understand that they are the ones who are really the place where the rubber meets the road, because they are the ones who are going to recruit students from foreign countries and work with those students, and eventually when those students become colleagues and either stay in the United States or go back to China, continue to work with them. And then they are the ones who interact with the funding agencies and write proposals. And so really the main thing is really simple, clear ethical guidelines for PIs. And then the PIs have to communicate that down to graduate students. I mean, one thing that was really striking to me in all of this is I've been, you know, a professor for 35 years or something, and I've had, you know, 15 graduate students, and, you know, worked in big groups. And when we have a meeting, a group meeting, which we do every week, I've never had a conversation with my group about what should you not disclose about what's happening in the group. You know, we talk about stuff. There's good ideas, there are bad ideas, but I've never said, it maybe a very few occasions, I've never said, okay, you know, what we just talked about, don't tell anyone else. You know, that's kind of antithetical to us. But sometimes it's going to, I think there are times that we do have to say that. You know, for competitive reasons, and it's just tough. It's just tough, and it's something that runs counter to our real desire for openness, because, you know, we just like to talk about our stuff all the time. That's what professors are all about. So I don't feel like I've given you a very good answer. I just really think that it has to start with us who are PIs and department heads, and if we wait for Congress or our universities to tell us what to do, it might not be something to our liking, as my colleague Professor Becker used to say.
There's other questions. There one question to Maggie. So the question is, the National Science Foundation and Technology Council's Joint Committee on Research Enterprise is intended to bring the disparate threads together. And this is a very challenging because of the many different voices. But as of the only one of the voices on J-core, what is a J-core? And so Maggie, can you look at this question? And this question's to you.
I don't think I'm the best person to speak about within the science community who should speak. And I think this getting down to the PIs makes a lot of sense because they're the people who best understand, you know, in the day-to-day what it means to be doing this research. But for me on the legal side, what's been increasingly clear is there hasn't been enough communication across the legal community and the science community. And that's another bridge that we need to create. And as someone who does criminal law, that going to this issue of what should be the consequences of failure to disclose, whether it be 1,000 talents plan or other talent plan or failure to disclose foreign bank accounts, you know, thinking more too about when those should be handled as consequences that are administrative sanctions or sort of research sanctions as compared with kicking it up to the level of being criminal. And really that these are serious felonies. So I think we're seeing here, there's many layers to this conversation and that it's not one bridge, there's multiple bridges that need to be put in place.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly since this report came out and since, you know, this is, there have been many other really good reports as well. A lot of my faculty have been coming and asking, should I disclose this? Should I disclose that? And it's tough because you know you don't need to disclose everything, but you need to really think about, you know, make sure you're presenting an accurate picture of yourself as PI.
Okay, Peter. Also, there are several comments on the most recent bill, the American Innovation and Competitiveness, that has been passed in the Senate, and part of it is the Endless Frontier. In the Endless Frontier report, the talent program or talent participants are prohibited to apply for national funding agencies. So the 4 countries included explicitly listed: China, Korea, Iran, and Russia. So this is just comment. This is the comment. Since you mentioned about,
I'm assuming it's North Korea, not
North Korea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's actually in the act now.
It was in the Endless Frontier Act.
Okay.
That I read. Yeah. And that's a part of now merged into the new bill that has been passed by Senate, and it's in the House, and President Biden said he's going to sign.
Well, that's concerning. I mean, as I said, I think the 1,000 Talents programs, you just have to look at them one by each and ask yourself the questions that you know, that I listed. And there's a tremendous complication in some of them that you actually sign a contract, and of course, if you're not Chinese, you sign a translation of a contract, but it's the Chinese version of the contract that's binding. So that's a place where I think you need to be careful if you're asked to sign a contract. But I think that's yeah, I think it's important that not be in the bill. But
okay, Zhang, you may talk after you. Ji, you are the next.
Okay, thank you, thank you. This is a question for Jay Brett. So, and many people have talked about this basic fact, but we don't really talk to the right people. You're the right people. This basic fact is, most people, I guess, always believe, want to do proper disclosure. I think we should believe in basic decency of common people. I guess there's no disagreement about this fact. And also another fact is disclosure rule has been changing rapidly in the last few years. For example, Harvard just changed it again recently. So the reason for change clearly is because the previous rules are unclear, right? This must be the fact. So given these facts, the third fact is DOJ has prosecuted people with unclear rules. So how do we get around this kind of thing? This, I think, is a hard. So believe in human decency, and also respect the fact that the disclosure rule wasn't very clear. So and now the prosecutor in the muddy rules. So how do we think about these things? Jay, please.
Yes, well, thank you for your question. Certainly, as a prosecutor, or at least now one who supervises prosecutors, it is very important that before we bring a case, we are convinced that we can prove that the person committed the crime, and particularly in fraud cases, acted with the requisite bad intent beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you look at the cases that we have done, and some are pending, and I can't comment on the pending cases, but if you look at the cases that we have done, particularly in the last time I spoke at a similar forum, the case was pending sentencing. This was Dr. Song Zhang from Ohio State University, who pled guilty to having made false statements on his disclosure forms. The types of things that he failed to disclose were not anywhere in a gray area. He had multiple patents in China that he didn't disclose. He had paid positions and equity interest in startup companies that were capitalizing on the type of research that he was doing that he failed to disclose. He had paid positions with universities that he failed to disclose. And on top of that, he also had 1,000 talent funding that he failed to disclose. And it really isn't a puzzle why he pled guilty, because these were not muddy areas. And certainly if we thought the case was so muddy, we wouldn't bring it. Now, every defendant in a pending case, and I should say that Dr. Zhang was sentenced to 33 months. We had submitted an affidavit or a sworn declaration from Dr. Michael Lauer at the National Science Foundation, who set out in pretty great detail how the National Science Foundation was injured by the false statements that Dr. Zhang had made, in particular how it called into question the veracity of his research, and how everything that he had done essentially had to be thrown out and the money had to be given a second time to somebody else. And the court in sentencing Dr. Zhang had some very harsh comments about his conduct. Again, there are cases pending. We have a case that is in trial right now and will probably end next week. Anning Hu, who was an engineering professor at the University of Texas, whom we charged with having made false statements in his grant applications to NASA. Certainly that is one of his defenses that he's been making at trial, that it was not clear. A jury will now decide early next week whether or not it did have sufficient clarity. But you know, to sort of follow up on some of the, and I've been reading some of the questions. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Lauer from NIH, not NSF. I apologize for that. I have this declaration sitting in front of me, so I should not have made that mistake. But you know, to follow up on some of the questions here about the talent plans, we've been very clear that membership, and putting aside whatever Congress may legislate, that membership in a talent plan or funding for a talent plan standing alone is not per se illegal. But talent plan and other emoluments that are offered by both universities and private entities in China can be a pathway to corruption. And I agree with you that, that people are not fundamentally bad. I've been prosecuting for, for over 30 years. And I think back on one of my early white collar cases, which involved adulterated orange juice. That is, there was a company in Grand Rapids, Michigan that was on hard times. And in order to save costs, it began cutting what was purported to be 100% pure orange juice concentrate with concentrate that actually had cheaper sugar, invert beet sugar, substituted for the pure orange juice. And it also had certain chemicals, amino acids and other things that were added to cover up the adulteration. And it also had, they had worked with an individual in Germany who was injecting a preservative into the juice. And these were all, otherwise fine, upstanding citizens, but they fell to temptation, and that happens. That is what white collar crime really, that's the essence of white collar crime, that most of the people that committed, have led many times otherwise exemplary lives, but they fall prey to certain weaknesses. I never sat down with Dr. Zhang, but my guess would be that if I were to have a conversation with him, that part of what happened with him is that there were too many riches that were thrown in front of him. And he became weak and he succumbed to it. And where does that fit in our national security policy? It's that that China represents a certain type of national security threat, just as Russia represents a certain national security threat, Iran, North Korea, and its ability to make use of what the FBI has called non-traditional collectors, or those who are not sort of assets of a foreign intelligence service, but are in some way enticed to do the bidding of the foreign country. That is a significant national security concern, and the ability to play on certain people's weaknesses to accomplish other goals is at least something that we can use our criminal tools to try to disrupt and to try to punish.
Thank you.
I do think that it would be good to at least adopt a provisional standard for disclosure. There's confusion over amounts. I mean, somebody gets a $500 honorarium. Should that be reported? Some places yes, some places no. That's
right. And I guess what I would say is that we're not, the cases we bring aren't the $1,000 honorarium cases.
No, but people worry. I mean, I think what you say is exactly correct. Your typical university faculty member wants to do the right thing and report it, but the rules are unclear.
Okay, G, it's your turn.
Yeah. So thanks, Peter, for a great discussion. So I'm fully in support of complete disclosure for the reasons that you outlined. I think that's the right thing to do. Looking to the future, I wonder, if the collaboration is clearly and towards publication. So whatever interactions and work is clearly going to be published in 2 or 3 months, and in fact, it's clear from the outset that the intent of the collaboration is for publishing and contribute to human knowledge. So does that ever fall into the CUI? I mean, barring breaking data standards. So it's clearly things that have been published in the literature, and the research is towards furthering publishing activities. Would that count ever? So would one ever be in trouble in doing those kind of activities?
Yeah, in the main, no. I mean, the NSTD 189 is pretty clear, but there's some kind of interesting corners. For example, there was a spacecraft that MIT built instruments for called TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. And so the camera instrumentation was built at MIT and then integrated into the spacecraft, and the data analysis pipelines were built at MIT, and one of the things you need for the pipelines is you need to know the orbit of the spacecraft. And there are certain orbits that are not classified, but that NASA did not want publicly disclosed. And so that was an example of controlled and classified information. The orbit was developed specifically for tests to carry out its mission to develop fundamental knowledge, but that particular orbit could not be discussed publicly. And in fact, I think it was the case that non-Americans could not, have access to certain parts of code that carried the orbit specification. So things like that, there are corners where.
So maybe you can think of that as a preparatory data. So if the research is on some controlled data or commercial data, then that certainly could be a problem.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent way of putting it. I did some work with a really high sensitivity CCD camera once, and I had to sign all kinds of NDAs, and in the publication we actually couldn't describe how the camera did what it did, or even give specific noise figures, and that was more an intellectual property. So it can be the case that in pursuing fundamental knowledge, you run into things that have to be controlled in certain ways. But my experience has been that is pretty exceptional. But that is a place where if you run into that, the PI really needs to have a conversation with the group and make sure they understand why that's being done and what shouldn't be disclosed. And that's not something, at least to my mind, that's not something that's part of our culture right now.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter, let me ask a question that in the list I sent to you, which is along the line of Ju's question regarding the research type. What kind of research we need to control? I think you mentioned publication-driven type of research should be open, because we publish, we disseminate the knowledge to the world. However, in our field, we publish paper, sooner or later, the results in the method in the paper has become a product, and we have not received a penny. So we have that kind of a research. So in the list of the question is, can the funding agencies make a clear and consistent definition to categories of research projects? So there are 4 types. Number 1, open research projects that welcome collaborations all over the world without any restriction. Number 1. Number 2, the controlled research projects that welcome collaboration all over the world, subject to the agreement from the funding agencies. Number 3, mission-oriented research projects that welcome approved international collaborations. And the last category is the classified research that restrict international collaborations. So we don't know what type of a research we are currently doing. We would like to have a clear, consistent guideline. Any comments? And you saw this question.
Yeah, well, this is a really interesting question. So the nature of research, even fundamental research, I spent a long time looking for dark matter unsuccessfully. That is fundamental. The intent was always publication, but people invent things, and so what you have to have capacity for is that in the pursuit of fundamental research projects, suddenly you generate some intellectual property. And how is that controlled? Now, if it's not related to national security, the universities through technology licensing offices have very good ways of doing that, and they work hard to publicize what you do if you think you might have invented something that has monetary worth. And usually you begin interacting with them, and they make some assessment, they guide you through the process. I think a taxonomy like what you proposed could be useful, but you know, I'm in the School of Science, and so almost everything that happens in the School of Science at MIT is research with the intent of publication. And I would be interested in hearing from engineers how common it is to have a research project that, you know, for example, is funded by an industrial concern whose intent is developing intellectual property. I just don't know. The intellectual property I have is all accidental. You know, I do know that people in engineering develop things. So I think you could make definitions like what you proposed, but I think it's always going to need human judgment, you know, at where the boundaries are for reasons I just described. I don't think I answered your question very well, but and then item 4, most classified research. At MIT, we really don't have classified research on campus. You have to go somewhere else to do that. But other places do, and I don't have much familiarity with how that's managed. I'd be interested in hearing.
I think the two ends, the classified research and the very basic fundamental research, are very clear to us.
Yeah.
But most technology-related research is in the gray area.
Right. So I could imagine that two people in two different countries would collaborate in the context of your category 2 to you know, develop a high sensitivity infrared CCD, you know, large focal plane CCD for astronomy, and you know, there could be, you know, just to choose a country, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, collaboration with NASA for, you know, some future space telescope, could develop such a device that would suddenly be very, very, very interesting to people doing overhead reconnaissance. And how does the capabilities of that device and the proposal to produce that device, how is the intellectual property risk of that managed? And I think that would be done through, you know, non-disclosure agreements. And how those play in the agency, I don't know. I mean, I think Jim Olvested, I think Jim Olvested is here and could maybe mention that. I thought I saw Jim's name.
Okay, Peter, I have another question. Can you comment on the impact of your JSON report after it was published 1.5 years ago?
Well, I know the NSF took it very, very seriously and adopted many of our recommendations, and that there was actually a team within the NSF working on incorporating our recommendations into the, I think it's called the Proposal Preparation Guide so this is enormous document that describes everything you need to do to prepare a proposal. Most NSF grantees never read that because their offices of sponsored projects are the ones who read it and understand. But so I think it had impact at the NSF, and I think they adopted a lot of it. We got, Sally, Tim and I, we got a lot of interest. We did a lot of briefings through with groups like this one. We did brief Hill and Senate and House staffers on it, that was actually quite interesting because they at the beginning of the briefing there was just an enormous amount of pushback about why do you think you can manage this? We really need to have controls in place. They were very interested in CUI and didn't quite understand the big deal of it. But after some after a couple hours of discussion, they really, I think, came around to the notion that the best people to manage this are the universities, and that the key people at the universities are the PIs who, are really, central to the whole thing, as I described before. So, and there were some other pretty influential reports that came out around about the same time. There's a lot of this going on at the NIH as well. They are pretty active in this area.
Okay, thank you. Steve Pei, it's your turn.
Thank you. I think Jay just mentioned about Emin Hu's trial this week in Northville. I think based on the report, the provost of University of Tennessee testified. Basically, I think Emin Hu disclosed all his connection with China to the university in more than one document. And unfortunately, those were not taken into consideration. And he was held accountable for not disclosing those connections. But everything was fully disclosed to the university.
Yeah, well, one thing I have to remind my faculty frequently is if you disclose it to the university, that means you should also put it on your current and pending support. That doesn't automatically, just because you just disclose it to MIT, it doesn't automatically transfer so I don't know this specific case, but you do have to report it on current and pending support for your federal grants.
I think part of the problem here is really, as you mentioned earlier, that the requirements across agencies are not consistent.
Yeah.
Many rules were there, but they were not enforced in the past.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true, and it's a burden on the PIs. I mean,
well, the contract is between the agency and the university. I think university, the institution, has to share some of the responsibility, not just throw the scientists under the bus. I think I can see that they can implement some administrative discipline there. I think that's fair. But until we have a clear guidelines across the agency and got fairly publicized and go through some training program across all agencies, at this time, just like what Maggie mentioned earlier, to criminalize in China is inappropriate. I think there were suggestions. I think they should be given a grace period, like what, for example, Baylor College of Medicine did 2 years ago, basically to make up the discrepancy in the documentation. I think at this point, to go too far to apply criminal laws to punish these people, I think it really questioned the justice of the procedure.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you, and I think in some cases you know, it's really to scare people away from having anything to do with collaborations in China, which I think is nuts. I mean, one thing I feel like gets lost in this discussion is that some of the thinking I run into is Soviet era thinking, which was, you know, 70s, 80s, and really that, you know, we had this strong military adversary in the Soviet Union, and there was the United States, and that was the great conflict in the world. And at that time we had, from what I understand, very little contact and trade with the Soviet Union. I mean, it was not huge. The United States and China are tangled up in each other in so many different ways, and everything is coupled to everything else. And you know, there's tremendous economic cooperation and competition and military confrontation and spying on each other and all of this, but we are tangled up in a way that we're never going to get untangled. And this is one example of it. And you know, we need to sort it out. And I think sorting it out means really, really clear guidelines, and really turning to the PIs and you know, making the PIs do what you're doing, which is demand clarity. And I think we really need to say that with one voice. And I think this was in the chat earlier. I think the professional societies are really a venue to do this. I think we need to complain and insist inside of our own departments and schools, but having the professional societies develop, you know, field-specific guidelines for collaboration and disclosure would help a lot too, because fields are very different. For example, I mean, I'm not a life scientist, but my understanding is that certain culture samples, a PI with a postdoc who's, you know, moving on to a faculty position will freely give, you know, the cell lines, so that that young scholar can start their career at a new place. If that happens to be a young scholar who's returning to a faculty position in China, you know, suddenly it's leakage of intellectual property from, you know, perhaps the federal point of view, where in fact it's the norm of that field for life sciences. And that's just something that needs to be communicated clearly to, you know, on both sides of the fence.
I think, Peter,
and it's hard.
Yeah, Peter, if I paraphrase what you just said, our country were not prepared to deal with this challenge until now. We wake up, we realize there's a problem, and that's what's going on in the Congress right now. I think with Endless Frontier bill growing from 160 pages to over 2,000 pages, there are so many bills addressing the national security and research security issues has been folded into the bill. So it's getting much, much worse, or much, much more elaborate than what was in the original bill, which was only addressed if you are participating in those talent recruiting programs, then you should not get federal funding. I think the procedure now, if the bill goes the way it is going through the Senate, passed by the Senate, that means the OSTP will take the responsibility to develop the guidelines. With all the expectation, they'll be much more elaborate, but I think that's the right of the government to do it. How much that will impact on the international collaboration is a separate issue. But until that happens, I think it's really unfair to punish the scientists for the inconsistency of and also unpreparedness of our agencies, institutions, and punish the scientists.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know specific cases, but do think that it is problematic that, I mean, certainly the kind of questions I get asked and the kind of guidance I've seen given is complicated and not consistent. And so I agree with you.
Okay, Yiguang.
Okay, thank you. And Peter, thank you for the great talk. And I have a question generalized and asking both you and Jay. In the last few months, I really try to think hard where to draw the line in terms of conflict of interest. Because there are so many rules from the government, it keeps being updating, changing, and very difficult to follow. But one thing I heard from tonight's talk is that maybe it's simple for me as a guideline, is that does any collaboration with China that help China more economically or technologically than any other countries and the United States will fall into the category of conflict of interest. Is that right?
I mean, I don't know what you mean by help China. You mean help?
I mean, help China for that collaboration, help particularly China more than United States or any other countries in terms of economically or technologically. That become a conflict of interest. For example, if you review a paper for Chinese authors, that basically benefit for everybody in the world. That's fine. But if you review a research grant for Chinese National Science Foundation, that helps China, that become a problem. Is that a better draw line in terms of a conflict of interest?
I mean, maybe Maggie Lewis can help us. I mean, reviewing a grant application for the NSF of China, you know, I think it's a good thing because it gives you insight to what a fellow scholar is doing. You're providing your expert opinion. It's you know, it's not like giving them the latest IR camera. I mean, it's not a huge service. It's one thing that a scholar does for another scholar. I see it like that. I could imagine there might be people with strong personal feelings who would not want to do that, but I wouldn't raise it to, you know, the violation of any principle of our country. You know, I mean, as I say, we're tangled up with China in all kinds of different ways, and I think the more things like that we do, the better. You know, the better for all of us.
Thank you.
So I don't know. Maybe I just have too rosy a view, but the things I've seen have been really kind of in the J. Bratt category, which are people who really. I mean, I'll put it another way: people who did not feel well respected at their home institution and felt well respected overseas. One case was China, one case was another country, and were given a lot of accolades, and then we're not careful about reporting them. I mean, and it was pretty clear.
So Jay, do you want to make a short comment on this question?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think going back to what I said earlier, which is that, you know, the sort of isolated example that Yiguang gave is not the sort of thing that we would be looking at as a basis for a prosecution. I mean, there would have to be some course of conduct over a period of time. There would have to be a loss to the US government of some sort. Again, the model being funding that was provided that otherwise would not have been given had full disclosures been made. So the example of assisting in reviewing a paper or assisting a student, as I've seen in some of the comments, that really doesn't rise to the level of the type of harm that we would want to apply the criminal law to.
Jay, thank you very much for the clarification. This is very helpful.
Can I just jump in with one, a couple of points, and I need to jump off. This has been such a great webinar, but I think, the big takeaways for me are first clarity, because, we need to make it so that people aren't constantly worried, because, a lot of this is anecdotal, but we are seeing increasing even polling data that scientists are either have left or are considering leaving the United States because of political rhetoric and concerns about their safety. And so if our ultimate goal is to promote an innovation economy, and I think we all agree on that we really need to keep that talent that we do have, retain it, and continue to attract talent. And I really worry we're shooting ourselves in the foot, especially when I get quoted in China daily about how the US is turning into this xenophobic, racist place, and I don't want own goals by the US. And then secondly, I think this point about messaging, and earlier on, Peter Fisher mentioned about interactions with the FBI and the way that the threat awareness briefings have been done. I have serious issues with some of the threat awareness movies, like the Nevernight Connection. So I think there's also a lot of work that could be done about how this messaging is conveyed, and so that it doesn't, whether the intention is there or not, come across as singling out people with connections to China, whether it be via their nationality and or heritage ties, ethnicity, are feeling like they're subject to enhanced scrutiny. And so there is low-hanging fruit here. There are ways to make this better. It's not easy, but I do appreciate all the work that AASF and others are doing to start this conversation. And I really do appreciate not just Jay Bratt, but other colleagues he has that are making big efforts for outreach, because we need that.
Yeah, I'll certainly second that. And having you too, Maggie, it helps. The more perspectives, the better.
Okay, thank you. Kai, it's your turn. You will be the last one.
Okay. Well, thank you, Peter, for a wonderful webinar. Thank you for a special guest. The question I have is about the chilling effect of on the Asian American or Chinese American scholar community when there's so many prosecution cases. I think we have several. For example, I personally know a few very distinguished scientists who were recruited by China and unsuccessfully in the past, but because of the chilling effect, they actually left US and went to China. Or some of them are considering being recruited. So the question is that when you have a program like a China Initiative, I understand we all worry about the security of our country, but we also need to worry about the talent flow, right? And yeah, when the top talents were going, previously unsuccessfully, now they're going, and are we helping Chinese government to for their talent program? I mean, Peter, I would just want your view on this, how you feel about this.
Well, I think I feel the same way you do. I think it's appalling. I think, from the briefings we got, I think there are, clearly things going on and mechanisms in place that the Chinese government has put that are, very, very concerning. But that threat is small compared to the possibility of losing access to people who want to come and work in the United States. And this is at a lot of different levels. We kind of focus on the graduate students who come to the United States, but the undergraduates who come, I mean, the Chinese middle class sends their sons and daughters to our university for undergraduate education. And this is the aggregate tuition they pay is an export that is greater than our largest agricultural export, which is soybeans. It's tens of billions of dollars a year. And that tuition helps a lot of US colleges that are struggling now. So there's a lot of different layers to this, and what we do not want to do is alienate this large class of people who want to come here and study with us and either stay or go back, but you are just a tremendous asset to this country. I mean, it's just it's a huge number of people. It's 300,000 people when you count undergraduates and graduates. And, you know, for the undergraduates, you multiply that by, you know, $50,000 a year tuition, and you run into a lot of money. And you know, it's not consistent with American values either. And so this is, you know, it's tricky because, you know, I think there is a threat. It's not huge and we can manage it. But I think what we really need to help people get away from is the racist aspect. It's just bad.
Okay, thank you. I think it's quite late, and this is a very active webinar. There's lots of questions in the chat board we're not able to answer. So I think we have time to have another discussion in this type. But before we end the webinar, I would like to thank several key persons to make this event possible. First, Professor Xiaodong Wen. He has made a lot of efforts to organize this webinar. And Professor Yuanyuan Zhou and Professor Yiran Chen worked very hard to keep related communities informed about this webinar. We also thank strong support from Professor Yasheng Huang and Professor Kai Li, who are the president and the vice president of the Asian American Scholar Forum. And one important person I'd like to really give a special acknowledgement, who is Nancy Chin, a volunteer working in the forum, who has tirelessly coordinated many events, including this one. We thank Professor Fisher again for his wonderful presentation and answers to many questions. Finally, I would like to thank all of you who participate in the webinar. And today's webinar will be online in YouTube in a few days. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Maggie Lewis. Thank you very much.
Good night, Xiaodong.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.